This is about the idea of the second language user, or L2 user. A person who is multi-competent, that's to say they know more than one language, is rather different from a person who only knows one language, a monolingual native speaker. What I'm going to do is show some examples of what these differences are. First of all, second language users actually think differently from monolinguals in some ways. The most famous example of this is the idea of colours. In many languages, the words for colours divide up the spectrum in different ways from those in English. For example, in Greek and in many other languages, these two blue colours are actually thought of as different colours, not as in English they are light blue and dark blue. So in Japanese they have different names and are regarded as different colours. So what happens when somebody learns another language? Do they keep to the same colours that they have in their first language, or do they start changing? And the answer, certainly with this example, is that Japanese people change when they learn English because they have a different prototype colour for the two blues, that is to say their sort of favourite blue of each kind, and that they also make less distinction between the two colours. The next important difference is that L2 users use language in different ways from monolinguals. One of these uses is going to be code switching, that is to say the ability to use two languages more or less simultaneously, i.e. to switch from one to the other while you're speaking, a very common use in bilinguals who both know the same two languages. So we can see from the example that the Japanese English code switching involves a mixture of Japanese and English grammar, Japanese and English vocabulary, and probably pronunciation as well. This is something which monolingual can't do, i.e. use two languages at once. L2 users also have an increased awareness of language compared to monolingual native speakers. Children and adults seem to be able to see the arbitrariness of language rather more easily if they know two languages than if they know one, as in this sort of famous example where children are asked to give an arbitrary name to something, and the bilingual children are much better at it than monolingual children. This is then called increased metalinguistic awareness. The most surprising thing about second language users is perhaps that they actually have a different knowledge of their first language, their mother tongue, than people who only speak one language. Let's take an example of syntax. How do we find out the subject of the sentence? If we take a sentence like, Geordies love beer, how do we know what the subject of the sentence is? One way of doing it is to look for whatever comes first in the sentence. So if we change the order, we still have the first thing as the subject. If we say beer loves Geordies, to an English person, that has beer as the subject. In some languages it's more important to have the number the same. So if you say Geordies loves beer, again to an English person, Geordies would be the subject, but in a language where the verb has to agree with the subject, beer would be the subject even though it comes last. A third way of finding the subject is that it may have a special form. So we can say he loves it, he is the subject, but we can't say him loves it because him is an object. Again, in some languages, this is the crucial clue to the subject of the sentence. And the fourth way is that in some languages, the subject of the sentence has to be alive. So, for example, I can say, I play snooker, but I can't say snooker plays me. You can't have an inanimate subject. Each language has a particular way of finding out what the subject is in the sentence. When you learn another language, however, your first language is influenced by the second language that you know. So if you're a Japanese speaker of English, for whom the subject has to be animate, when you know English, you'll find this is a slightly less strong tendency. So Japanese people who know English actually process Japanese sentences slightly differently because they know English. In other words, second language users actually have slightly different grammars in their first language than people who only speak one language. Another characteristic of second language users is that very often they're better at communicating than people who only speak one language. Sometimes this has been shown for children. For example, Hungarian children who've been taught English write better Hungarian essays than children who haven't been taught English. And also we can find this in very many literary figures who speak more than one language. People like Nabokov or Samuel Beckett or Joseph Conrad, where their command of another language seems to have helped them to communicate. Finally, one of the most intriguing aspects is that people's brains change according to what they learn. This was first shown for, I suppose, London taxi drivers who had different brains because they had the knowledge of how to drive around London. This had developed particular aspects of their brain rather than others. Second language users too may have slightly different brains, and here's one of the examples that people have found where it would seem that the connections between the left-hand side of the brain and the right-hand side of the brain are different in people who know second languages from people who only know one. So what I tried to show then is that the second language user is rather different from a monolingual, that they have a different range of attributes, a different set of things they can do, different way of processing information, not fantastically different, but there are differences all along the way. So they're not deficient native speakers, they're people of a rather special kind, second language users. And of course, nowadays, probably there are more second language users in the world than there are monolinguals.